Oh no!
I can't believe you've done this.
Another rock tier list? On a metal channel?
Poser!
Every now and then a band from my pre-metal youth puts out a new album and I get the scratch to walk down memory lane. So today we are ranking the albums of Green Day, starting with 39 Smooth in 1990. It's always interesting going back to these first albums to hear how they started and how far they've come. A lot of the core elements are already in place here, but just without the same level of earworm songwriting and edge that they would develop with time. It has a very kind of loose 80s punk vibe to it I'd compare to bands like The Clash and Social Distortion. It's fine, but kind of forgettable. I'd be surprised if there are people out there who love this one, but let me know in the comments if and why you do. This is all my perspective as always, but I am putting it at meh tier. Then we had Kerplunk in 1991. Similar vibes to this one as well, but maybe trending in a slightly more rock direction, and I can already hear more of those trademark writing elements seeping into 2000 Light Years Away. Songs are already catchier, if still a little loose at times. They also lean further into their sense of humor with Dominated Love Slave. Then there's One of My Lies, Android, Who Wrote Holden Caulfield, and even an earlier version of Welcome to Paradise that's already like 90% there. Really stepping it up here, they haven't quite formed Voltron yet, but the ground was set and it was still fun to go back and revisit this all of these years later. I actually remember picking this up at a library in like middle school, I think. Middle school, early high school. Yeah, it is going to great tier. Then we have Dookie in 1994. I'm not even going to try to string you along with my thoughts on this one. To me, Dookie is a 10 out of 10, and it was actually one of the first CDs I ever owned. Billy took their sound away from the more pure punk leanings of the previous albums and infused those influences with all of the best angsty 90s alternative vibes of the time. Now signed to Reprise Records, and for the first of several collaborations with producer Rob Cavallo, they recorded what many still consider to be their best album and one of the defining albums of the decade. I remember having my, at the time, 8-year-old brain blasted by hearing tracks like Longview, Welcome to Paradise, She, When I Come Around, and Basket Case on the radio. The album is already like 50% singles, and then the deeper cuts are all just as strong in my opinion. Dookie hit number 2 on Billboard 200 just under Garth Brooks and won a Grammy for Best Alternative Album in 1995. It's certified diamond for a reason. You know it's going to perfection. Yo, we have plenty more albums to go, but if you're enjoying the video, help me out by hitting the like button and commenting your own rankings. Let me know where you disagree, where you agree. Let's have a conversation down there. Also, I'm recording this during these terrible ice storms, and there is currently a massive, like 6-story tree 20 feet above where I'm sitting right now. So if you also want to support me on Patreon, insurance is probably going to take care of most of it, but I'd appreciate any support that I can get. But next up, we have Insomniac in 1995.
I'm having trouble trying to sleep.
Another number 2 record for the band, certified 2 times platinum, but with such a high bar set by its predecessor, this one doesn't get quite the same love. I do see its supporters out there though. There are several singles on this album, but I feel like the only one you still hear nowadays is Brain Stew, which remains as one of the band's most played songs, but the rest never really stuck with me the same way as those from Dookie. Funnily enough, the first time I played on stage when I used to play drums was a middle school performance of Brain Stew, and the vocalist chickened out, so he played one of the world's most repetitive songs instrumentally, and also it's worth pointing out that the chord progression is really just Chicago's 25 or 6/4. Also, shout out to Baby Uvula 2, and of course the D-beat-driven Jaded, which does also still get some replay. Still a solid album, not quite as memorable. I'm going to put this one also at great tier. Then we got Nimrod in 1997. Another huge album for the band, thanks in no small part to the broad appeal of Good Riddance, Time of Your Life, which was hilariously a song that would be played at every graduation ceremony for the next 10 years, despite it actually being more of a shitpost breakup song. That aside, there are plenty of even better jams on here, like the rollicking Nice Guys Finish Last, The Grouch, Platypus, and Redundant. I also credit Hitchin' a Ride and Take Back as some of my earliest exposure to harsh vocals. Then there's Uptight, Worry Rock, and the brass-infused King for a Day. There's a lot more experimentation instrumentation by design, which on some level makes it more impressive and dynamic than Dookie, but I would argue that it's less tight. Even so, it's still one of my favorites, debuted at number 10 on Billboard. They were getting more and more heat about abandoning punk at this point, but I think it's pretty clear that they were making the right moves. I'm also putting this one at perfection. And we got Warning in 2000. After that impressive 90s run, I feel like they entered the 2000s on kind of a meh note by comparison. The album has 3 singles in Waiting, Minority, and Warning, but again, I don't feel like any of these had as much staying power, despite the title track in particular being played basically every hour when it was released. Notably, these were also slower tracks, and even at the time felt a little too radio-friendly at this point. And I'd argue that energy permeates throughout most of the album. It just feels very studio constructed on an assembly line without the same angst and energy of the previous records. All the edge has been kind of sanded off. First album on Reprise to not go platinum, but it is worth noting that this album leaked on Napster, which may have affected sales. I'm going to put this one at meh tier. And we have American Idiot in 2004. Trigger warning, because I have a lot to say about this much beloved album that some fans are not going to want to hear.
Am I so out of touch? No. It's the children who are wrong.
This was the band's first foray into a full-on concept album, very much colored by the fallout of 9/11, the Iraq War, and the Bush administration. I actually remember the day that the title track premiered and liking it at the time, but man, if they overplayed some of the previous singles, they drove that one into the fucking ground. Then they started trickling out more like Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and Wake Me Up When September Ends, all of which became hugely popular and continue to be mainstays to this day. Me though, this was just like a continued evolution of what I didn't like about Warning. What I liked the most about Green Day was their perfect mix of dark, alternative, and pop punk, and to me this was just preachy, overproduced, and overmarketed pop music.
Move this man!
I respect the work they put into it. Like, this is undoubtedly impressive in many different ways, and the audience and critical response speak for themselves, with it hitting number 1 on Billboard among dozens of others and winning multiple awards, including 2 Grammys. That said, I just don't care for this version of Green Day. It was the smart direction from a business and commercial standpoint, and I can't say that I wouldn't have done otherwise, but as a listener, I could kind of do without it. I'm splitting the difference a bit on this one. I don't really enjoy it, but I think they have way worse albums. I do think it's actually, like, well written, well put together. There's a lot of creativity in there, so I'm gonna kind of put it in the middle at good. Then we have 21st Century Breakdown in 2009. With the success of American Idiot, the wise decision was to try and recreate that lightning in a bottle a second time, and as such, this picks up very much where they left off. More big, sappy anthems slowed down to maximize audience sing-alongs. Know Your Enemy is a decent enough single, but it largely just feels like they recycled chord progressions and slapped training wheels on it for simpletons. Again, if you love this album, the purpose of my videos is never to claim that my taste is better and that you should agree with me, but to me, this is 69 minutes of saccharine pop lobotomy. I'll at least credit American Idiot for originality and memorability, but I don't think this follow-up is either of those things. Murder City is okay, I guess. It was equally, if not in some ways more successful on Billboard and won another Best Album Grammy, though critical opinions were a little bit more mixed on this one. I'm putting it at meh tier. Then we got Uno in 2012.
Far away, waste away tonight.
So as if over an hour wasn't enough for you, next they decided to release 3 albums in the same year, and I remember upon hearing that announcement that I just didn't care enough at this point. With that in mind, prepping for this video was my first experience of hearing 99% of these songs. Starting with Uno, I am at least glad they were no longer tethered to a corny concept and instead just focusing on crafting individual tracks. Nuclear Family opens on a note somewhat reminiscent of Nimrod, but with more than a touch of classic rock and roll era energy. From there though, once more, Stay the Night feels almost AI generated, and Carpe Diem feels like a faded copy of a copy of a copy. Let Yourself Go is a decent enough single, but I don't really care for Kill the DJ or Oh Love. Of the deeper cuts, I'd also throw some mild praise to Loss of Control and Angel Blue, but yeah, this one's, it's kind of bad. Don't like it.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
They followed that up with Dose, again also in 2012. So on to part 2 with See You Tonight, already kicking things off on a lame note. They said they were going for more of a garage rock sound here, but tracks like Fuck Time and Lady Cobra are just pure dad rock energy that would have already sounded dated in the 60s. More very paint-by-numbers songwriting with almost nothing to catch my attention enough to even tap my foot to, and then I have no idea what they were thinking with the cringy hip-hop infused Nightlife. Only 2 singles here. Stray Heart is decent, nice bouncy little bass hook on that one, and it's admittedly pretty catchy. Amy, on the other hand, is just whatever. I could also point to Ashley as one of the stronger songs here, but yeah, another one that's going to bad. I think it's maybe even worse than part 1. Yeah, not good. Let's just move along here to Trey in 2012. The finale of this trilogy, again starting on a seriously underwhelming note with the again very retro diner jukebox anthem Brutal Love. More forgettable tunes ranging from lesser retreads to downright sleepers like Drama Queen. More instantly in one ear, out the other singles in X-Kid and The Forgotten. And honestly, if I want a piano ballad, I'm gonna go listen to my main man Elton John. Walk Away is probably the one track I might revisit from this one. More trash, honestly. In retrospect, I have no regrets about ignoring these when they came out and would not be upset if I never heard them again. So, yeah, going to bad.
Garbage day! Huh? No!
Then we got Revolution Radio in 2016. Continuing deeper into what I'm calling my post-caring era of Green Day, into records I didn't even recognize by name at this point. Another completely dull and uninspiring opener in the kind of ironically titled Somewhere New, but I will give it to Bang Bang that this was the first point since Nimrod that actually got me bobbing my head. Very fun 90s era sounding track. Revolution Radio is another strong single, and while I don't love Still Breathing, I still like it better than anything off the last 3 albums. Also enjoy Too Dumb to Die. I feel like they regained a bit more of their mojo here with just a little bit more of that old edge and with guitars that actually have a little bite to them. They still managed to hit #1 on Billboard, which is something I personally find kind of annoying when it comes to legacy acts. Like, much like Metallica, these guys have gotten big enough that they could have released a cough into a microphone as a single and it would go platinum. Even so, this is definitely a step up in my opinion, even if it's still not quite as re-listenable as those early albums. So I'm going to put it up at good, just under American Idiot. Then we got Father of All Motherfuckers in 2020. The opening title track feels more like The Hives or The White Stripes to me than Green Day, but it does have some good drumming and bass work, similar notes for Fire Ready Aim. Also expect lots of clapping on this album, for better or worse, and even some tambourine. Pretty corny backing vocals on single Oh Yeah. I was hoping after the last album things would be trending back in a good direction for my personal taste, but this just feels like the band trying way too hard to reinvent themselves in a style that had already largely fallen out of popularity at least 5 years prior, if not longer. I was a teenager and Sugar Youth are at least re-listenable. But yeah, I would not recommend, and probably this is another one I don't think I'll ever go back to. I'm going to put this one at bad. And that brings us to Saviors in 2024. Honestly, my expectations at this point were so low that if I didn't run this channel, I probably wouldn't have even bothered, but here we are, and again, it's January. The American Dream Is Killing Me makes for a pretty solid opener overall, feeling sort of a cross between the Nimrod and American Idiot sounds with some fun bounce to it, similar notes for Look Ma, No Brains. Bobby Socks actually feels very much like a Weezer track, right down to the backup ooh-oohs, also the type of track that would have been featured in a late 90s, early 2000s teen comedy for sure. Dilemma, Living in the 20s in 1981, got my foot tapping, and also solid title track. On the flip side, I feel like I heard plenty of love for One-Eyed Bastard, but the main guitar hook reminds me a bit too much of Pink's So What for comfort. I could also do without Goodnight Adeline, Coma City, Fancy Sauce, or Susie Chapstick. My slow song pick here is the pretty touching Father to a Son. Corvette Summer and Strange Days are okay, if pretty generic. Honestly, I get similar vibes to this that I got from the new Blink-182 album. There's enough nostalgia to pull me in, even if the end result is rarely on par with the sounds that they are throwing back to. I'd say that we have like half of a really solid album here, and then the rest feels a bit half-baked, but they are at least still better than their worst material on this list. So ultimately, I was kind of torn. I think it's sort of between meh and good. I don't think it deserves to be on the same level of American Idiot though, so I don't know. Yeah, it's like sandwiched between these, but I guess I'll ultimately put it at meh. Y'all check out this playlist for more rock-related videos and rankings, or this one for my live reaction to the latest Blink-182 album. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. More metal to come, I promise, and I will see you in the trenches.